Hi, I'd like to welcome you to our Nexus webinar series. This is webinar number 3 in a series of 6. The title of this webinar is Making the Most of Cannabis Greenhouse Budgets. You can also view previous webinars and sign up for the next webinar at nexuscann.com/webinars. That's nexuscann.com/webinars. So my name is Dave Weisensell. I will be hosting this webinar, and David Laverty will be the key speaker for this webinar. If you have questions during this webinar, feel free to send them to us via the chat bar. We will do our best to answer all the questions at the end of the webinar. If we do not have time to get to all the questions, we will respond to your question via email. With that, I'd like to turn it over to David.
Thanks, Dave. Just want to go through the presentation outline here. Our challenge is making budgets feasible with falling wholesale cannabis pricing. And in light of that, things that we're going to talk about in the webinar are changing prices, a little bit on projected revenue, cost of goods sold, finance for the project, including the greenhouse structure and equipment, business support, taxes, and net income profit. So what we're going to cover here is this is going to be based upon a 12,000 square foot greenhouse with 3,936 feet of warehouse for an overall project of 15,936. So our assumptions, our numbers are going to be based upon a project of this size. Of course, many of our projects vary. We have many projects that are larger as well as those that are smaller, but this is a good average size for this webinar. Let's talk a little bit about prices. So overall, cannabis prices have been falling as the market becomes more competitive, as new companies enter, new products are developed, and as the market becomes mature. However, over the past 6 months, we've noticed that the price has gone up a little bit. It reached a low of $14.87 in the fourth quarter of 2016, and now we're up to $16.13. So there may be a little bit of a seasonality component here as opposed to the previous year. But also it looks like the price drop has stabilized, which is good for the overall industry. Now let's move to projected revenue. So in any business, keeping your revenue level at a solid amount is important. Here, we're basing this on 46 pounds per week, obviously times 52 weeks per year. That yields 2,392 pounds per year. So of course, your production output could vary. It could vary upon many factors. However, this is a good assumption for our discussion here. And with a wholesale price of $16.13, we have a projected revenue of just under $4 million a year at $3.8 million. And that works out to $322 per square foot. So this is a goal to shoot for based upon our project of 15,000 square feet. However, your actual revenue will vary with many factors. Okay, moving to cost of goods sold, this is a little bit tricky because we're just going to attribute to cost of goods sold things that specifically apply to the growing of cannabis. Of course, growing supplies, utilities for growing. We also factor in utilities for non-growing at another point. Labor, again, that's attributed to growing cannabis, as well as Social Security and Medicaid taxes for the labor involved in the growing, as well as employee benefits. So this comes out to a total of just over $500,000. And based upon $3.8 million in revenue, this is a healthy cost of goods sold number. In regular business, cost of goods sold is usually about 1/3. So here we're slightly less than 20%. So this is a healthy cost structure.
Okay, David, so just to reiterate, when you say growing-related cost of goods sold, that is the cost of goods sold associated only with growing, not with other utilities such as light fixtures or your standard water use or that sort of thing.
That's a good point, Dave. Yeah, we're isolating the cost of goods sold as to those costs that are directly involved in growing. So electricity that is involved in lighting the warehouse or administrative area would not be included in the cost of goods sold figure. Okay. Now let's move along to project costs. Again, these costs can vary. They depend upon equipment selections. They depend upon the type of construction involved, what part of the country you're in. But we're just going to have some basic numbers to get the discussion started. So for structure and equipment, fully loaded, and when I mean fully loaded, that includes lights, that includes benching systems, that includes odor mitigation, in addition to the basic components of heating, cooling, environmental controls, and light deprivation. We have a cost per square foot at $45, which equates out to $540,000. When you add in the construction, that's another $30 per square foot. That will include the general contractor, that will include electricity, plumbing, and any other specialty contractors involved in the project. So these costs can considerably vary based upon your bid, based upon the experience of the construction company, different areas of the country, if it's in a city as opposed to a smaller town. But these numbers are a good starting point. Now, often with the greenhouse project, a portion of the overall project will be for a warehouse. This is where you have shipping and receiving, trim, mother plants. It's where you will have administrative offices. Anything that's not directly under the sun can be put in a warehouse. Now, these costs are a lot lower than with a greenhouse, so the higher percentage of a warehouse in your overall project can lower the costs. We've come out with an overall project cost of $998,400. Now, often these projects will be financed. We don't do financing here at Nexus, but we can make some recommendations for financing partners that you can contact. Now, in the cannabis industry, there's a risk premium. Because there is more risk involved, lenders and equity companies are going to seek a higher return. So you're looking more at 12% as opposed to a typical business loan that might be 6 or 7%.
And David, that's probably going to vary depending on the arrangements that you've made with each individual financer.
It's going to depend upon a lot of things. It's going to depend upon the appetite of the lender for risk. It's going to depend upon if there's equity involved. It's going to depend if there's real estate involved. So business financing becomes very complicated, and there's a lot of factors that are going to go into this situation.
A lot of variables.
Now, with non-greenhouse equipment, we're estimating about $40,000 for office furnishings, vehicle, warehouse items. And in our model that we're going to show you later, we've averaged those costs over 5 years. So they're not huge costs, but they are costs that need to be accounted for. And non-growing labor and taxes. So in any type of business, as well as a cannabis business, there's going to be labor that is more involved in support, and cannabis is no different. So non-growing labor is going to include office assistants to handle the administration, maintenance, and then you're going to need to account for the employer portion of Social Security and Medicaid, as well as employee health benefits, including health insurance and other items. And we've estimated that at 25% of the overall salaries. And this labor is separate from the cost of goods sold.
Another point I'd like to make is that automation can also offset your labor costs significantly. Equipment such as having trimming machines or soil potting machines, high-speed processing and packaging equipment, those types of things can all bring your labor costs down.
That's a really good point. Automation is important, and that becomes an individual call as to how much automation you're going to bring into your project. Just want to cover some other business items here. In Colorado, there's a business personal property tax, and this often varies with different states around the country. So here you have an actual value of your project times an assessment rate, which equals an assessment value, and you multiply that by a tax rate, and then you end up paying personal property taxes on your project. In this case, it's not insignificant. It's $21,000 per year. So it varies by state, but is assessed by county, and you can check your location for details. And business personal property tax can vary considerably across the country.
So, David, is it safe to say then business personal property tax is very similar to the property tax you would pay on your home if you were a homeowner?
Yes, that's a great analogy. In Colorado, we have fairly low residential property taxes, and our business personal property tax is a little bit higher. In other states, that balance can flip, where personal residential property is high and business personal property is low. So it simply depends upon your individual state.
What about the equipment that goes into a business?
Equipment can be added on. We haven't included that here, but there could be a value placed upon your heating, cooling, environmental controls that could increase this number somewhat. So that's certainly a good thing to keep in mind. And we certainly recommend that you bring this issue up with your accountant. Next, moving on to overall business insurance. So you certainly want to have business insurance when it comes to cannabis. This covers your structure, property, crop, and general liability for anybody injured within your facility. Next is compliance software. This is very important because it will keep you up to date on regulations, not only involved in getting started, but maintaining and running your business, and staying in compliant with state regulators is highly important in this industry.
So the compliance software will actually help alert you to current changes in state and local regulations?
It will keep you alert of changes in various regulations and also flag due dates for reports and submittals that you need to make to your state. Cannabis, as you know, is a highly regulated industry, and making sure that you're in compliance is crucial.
Makes sense.
Next, with accounting and legal, we've made just some basic assumptions upon how much accounting work or legal work is involved. We recommend that you have a good team that includes accounting and legal. These professionals are vital to helping your business run in a professional manner, as well as steering clear of legal problems. Now, as a wholesaling company, you might not need to do aggressive marketing, but you will certainly need to have a brand, have a website, do mailings. So having a marketing budget is important, and we've based that upon 1% of revenue per year. However, it certainly could be 2 or 3% and be money well spent. Next, I want to talk a little bit about consultants. So when you come into a business such as this, there's very few people that have all of the knowledge that they need to successfully run a cannabis business, and that you'll need to gain expertise from outside consultants. However, it's very important to check the backgrounds and reputations of consultants, take a solid look at the contracts, the return on investment, and make sure that consultants are adding value to your business in a way that's going to make a positive impact on your bottom line.
You know, with consultants, there's a lot of people out there who claim to be consultants, and they all have different levels of proficiency. So I think it's a great idea to really check with a consultant's current client base so that you can get a good understanding of actually what they bring to the table.
And I can't emphasize that enough. The consulting business is difficult in any industry, and in cannabis even more so. A lot of consultants have come into the industry to try to make quick money. Making a profit is a good thing. However, they need to focus on serving their clients and adding value to your business and not just their business. Let's move into delivery. There'll certainly be a delivery cost. Again, this depends upon how close clients are to your operation, and we've just made a basic assumption here for delivery. And lastly, I always put a contingency into your budget. Here is at 3% of cost. You could even go higher at 5 or even 10%, but a 3% contingency factor will certainly give you some extra funds in your budget in case you have some unexpected expenses. And lastly, what I'd like to add here is this is just our attempt to put some numbers to a cannabis operation based upon our experience, based upon our knowledge from working with many of our clients. However, we highly recommend that you run your numbers through your accounting and legal teams as well as other financial consultants that you have and make the best decisions for yourself. That this model is not boilerplate by any means. Next, we'll move along to utilities. So here are some expenses for lighting, electricity, natural gas, water, as well as others. And we've come up with an estimate of $16 per square foot per year. And that's separated out from the non-growing portion. So as you can see, the utility usage directly tied to growing cannabis is a very high percentage of the overall utility bill for the operation.
You know, utilities are obviously going to vary somewhat geographically. Different areas are going to have different utility costs. But the thing to keep in mind that is when comparing this to growing in a warehouse environment, your utilities and your energy usage are always going to be lower because you're utilizing the energy from the sun instead of paying for electricity.
And that is just a fundamental point that is key to greenhouses. You have this huge energy source, so why not harness that energy source as much as possible?
Exactly.
Now here's our cannabis financial model, so based upon an income statement. So what we've done here is we've estimated the overall revenue at approximately $3.8 million, subtract cost of goods sold, and come down to gross revenue of $3.3. So this is a healthy relationship between cost of goods and overall revenue. Next, you have the various expenses that we've covered throughout this presentation so far, and you come down to total costs of $658,000, which in proportion to revenue is a solid situation. And one thing I would really like to emphasize here is taxes. So in the cannabis business, you're paying taxes on gross profit as opposed to net income. Because you are paying at a much higher rate, it's really important to have your costs under control so that you can have a healthy after-tax profit. The goal here is to have an after-tax profit of above 30% in order to compensate for the risk that you're taking as being a part of the cannabis industry. So in the cannabis business, as well as in any business, there are a number of high-impact cost drivers. So here we've identified cost of goods sold, the building and financing of your project, as well as labor, including taxes and employee benefits. So when you add up these three expenses, they cover 91% of the total cost. So what that tells us is these are the areas that you have to be as accurate as possible in terms of planning your business. If you're off in your estimates for fertilizer, if you're off in your estimates for administrative expenses, that's not going to throw off your whole cost structure. However, a significant error in any one of these areas can really throw off your budgeting and planning.
So what you're saying is some components like nutrient costs, or you mentioned fertilizer, growing medium, pots, those things can all vary quite a bit, but they're really not going to make a huge difference in the success of your business, so long as you keep your eye on your big three components.
Exactly. So something like nutrients, somebody might be spending about $40,000 on $3.8 million in revenue. And as a percentage, that is fairly small. But what this chart tells us, that cost of goods sold at 44% is our largest cost driver. The other cost drivers are building finance and labor, including taxes and employee benefits. So together, these three high-impact cost drivers total 91% of total costs. So you need to be as accurate as possible in calculating each of these three cost drivers. Now let's do a little comparison between greenhouse and warehouse costs. So as a greenhouse company, we estimate our range for greenhouse structure and materials to be about $25 to $45 per square foot. At 25, that's going to include fundamental heating and cooling, environmental controls, and light deprivation. As soon as you start adding in lighting, odor mitigation, benching systems, the cost moves up higher, closer to $45 per square foot. When you add in construction cost, again, the general contractor, electrical, plumbing, and specialty, that adds another $35 to $50 per square foot. That is still significantly less than being in a warehouse where the costs are $100 to $125 per square foot to retrofit an existing vacant warehouse. And warehouse purchase rates in major cities are around $100 per square foot. So no matter how you slice it, greenhouse construction costs are significantly less than in a warehouse.
They look to be about 50% or more less.
Yeah, it's a major savings. And when you're taking on a project of this size, to have those type of savings in your project costs can really put you on solid financial footing. So it's $60 to $95 per square foot for overall turnkey costs in a warehouse, again, depending upon the equipment selection and the type of construction that you're going to undertake. You also want to take a look, there could be $20 to $25 per square foot for building a greenhouse on undeveloped land. This is where you'll have to include water, electrical, sewage lines. You may need to put in a road that can add some additional cost. Often our clients are going out to rural areas where land costs are not that high, $5,000 to $10,000 per acre. But the closer you get to a major city such as Denver, Boston, Seattle, any number of the cannabis growing areas, the cost for land will climb significantly. Now with the warehouse, $100 to $125 to retrofit an existing warehouse. And lease rates for a warehouse can be $15 per square foot. So overall, the greenhouse costs are going to run about half of what a warehouse cost will be. So in summary, in terms of greenhouse versus warehouse, we've mentioned that greenhouse costs run about 50% of warehouse costs. And greenhouse operational costs can be about 2/3 lower due to the higher use of the sun. This leads to lower bills for heating and cooling, as well as the major utilities involved in your operation. And in an increasingly competitive cannabis market, the cost savings are vital to financial viability. Can't emphasize this enough. It's competitive, there's uncertainty, it's a changing dynamic market, and any area where you can make significant cost savings will benefit you and your entire team.
The main thing to consider when comparing a greenhouse to a warehouse is because you're using the energy of the sun, your overall expenses are going to be less in a greenhouse than they would be in a warehouse. So therefore, your profit margin is going to increase. You can produce your product for less cost per pound, and your carbon footprint also goes down.
Very well said, and good key points to remember. Let's talk a little bit about percentage metrics. Again, back to our table that we talked about earlier, with a 35% tax rate on gross profit, strong cash management is crucial. If you don't manage your costs, your profit margin can go down and down and down, and then you can just be in an average business, and it's not worth taking the risk of the cannabis industry for very average profits. And to maintain an after-tax profit of 30%, your total cost plus your cost of goods sold should not exceed 35%. So it's important to not only manage your business by numbers, but also manage them by percentages to keep your costs in line. And again, to mitigate for the risk that you're taking, just make sure that you're positioned for a solid reward. So labor. A team of 8 employees can operate a 15,000 square foot facility on a daily basis. That's a small staff of key employees, and that you can make additional staffing increases as your operation expands. Now, many of these employees are coming from other areas. They're young, they're high on enthusiasm, so be sure to perform adequate training to ensure their success as well as the success of your overall operation.
So I'd like to reiterate a point there. The bottom line is, with a well thought out budget and good business practices, there's a lot of untapped potential in this market. Cannabis is still the most lucrative crop out there and will be for quite some time, especially as the demand increases.
Good points. We've come into this industry because of the opportunity, and the opportunity is solid. You just need to make smart decisions in order to make your dreams come true. Just a little bit about Nexus Greenhouse Systems. We're celebrating 50 years as an industry-leading greenhouse manufacturer. We're headquartered in Colorado, as you know, the epicenter of the cannabis market. And we have an in-house team of professional engineers that are licensed in 49 states in order to certify and stamp your drawings, since most of our greenhouses are permanent structures. We have 2 manufacturing plants. One is located here in Colorado, and the other is Illinois. This makes for convenient shipping to any part of the U.S., regardless of the location of your project. And as for experience, we've just passed 1 million square feet of cannabis projects in 12 states. So we have a lot of experience and knowledge when it comes to creating these projects, and we have it down pretty well.
One thing that Nexus does that's a little bit different than a lot of our competitors is we don't have one package that we try and force all of our customers into. We will actually build our structures to meet your specific project needs. So we'll take into account your weather patterns, geographical location, the local requirements, the state requirements, and we'll truly custom tailor the project to fit what you're looking for.
And that's an excellent point. We look at each client as a unique opportunity to build a greenhouse to help them succeed, and we're going to take a look at all of the factors involved in designing a custom project.
So we'd like to take a minute to thank you for attending our webinar. We really appreciate it. For more information, please see our next webinar, which is going to be on construction steps for building a high-tech cannabis greenhouse. That's going to be airing on Wednesday,